Evolution.org Hardcore 2.0, episode 156 is coming your way. Today's going to be a fun one. We're going to talk about do steroid milligram scenarios and charting effects have merit by Beligas. And look, this is going to be an interesting one because what we're going to do, we're going to talk about a thread and we'll link it in the notes that you can go into and look. One of our forum members, he's a younger guy. He basically, you can tell he's studying this stuff. He's looking at these charts. He's looking at these. He came up with this charting where he could talks about milligrams of how much milligrams a week of steroids for this type of scenario. So he laid out 7 different scenarios, and we're gonna have fun on this podcast, and we're gonna debate these different scenarios, and we're gonna talk about do they have merit and how realistic they are. So, and we're also going to discuss within them the different Balagas steroid options and how you can use them to better yourself. But first, guys and gals out there, we are on a lot of platforms now, including Apple and Spotify. So for me, I like to take the podcast on the road. So whenever I'm making a long drive, I'll go if it's like a 45-minute or an hour drive. I like to listen to the podcast on one of the platforms that we're on, and it really is enjoyable to listen, especially to the older episodes and kind of listen to them and really go over it. And it helps me get better on this podcast as well. And Mobster, he likes to listen to the podcast too, sometimes when he's working out or when he goes for walks and stuff. So, you guys and gals out there, if you're doing the same thing, why not drop a review on the podcast? Drop some comments on the podcast. Smash the like buttons on the platforms. It helps our podcast gain traction, and it helps us with the algorithms. This way, other people, when they're listening to the other podcasts on this stuff, they can come to us. And what makes our podcast so much better than these other ones is we're not sitting here biased. We're not sitting here trying to sell you all these supplements and all this other crap that they try to sell you and bullshit you and try to get you to buy. We're just here to give you the knowledge, and we're just here to give you the information so that you can better yourself when you're using these hardcore steroid cycles. And that's what we try to do on this podcast. So we're very different than these other guys out there who are just trying to go out there and give you clickbait material and try to do drama and all this other stuff and these fake beefs that they have amongst each other. It's all phony. It's
Yeah,
all
yeah,
fake. We
yeah,
don't do that. We're just bringing you information, but that's the videos on their end that seem to get the most likes and
yeah,
traction and
yeah,
views. And we're trying to do this the right way. So by telling your friends and telling your family to listen to us, it helps us get the views and it helps us with the algorithm and grow the channel as much as we can. Mobster?
yeah. Look, guys, one of the things that I sometimes say on these shows is I almost challenge you to go away and look at the information we provided and look at the factual information that comes with that. And literally, to use the phrase, do your own research. Go onto the very encyclopedic type websites and see if our information is backed up by science. See if our information is backed up by studies. Not, as Steve said, just because we want to get traction, because we're looking to get $5 from YouTube because we got the most hits. I would rather we have a smaller, well educated audience across multiple platforms, like Steve said, that subscribe and love what we do because the information we put out there is solid every damn time. Okay, so that's the way that we're looking at this kind of stuff. It's the way that we want you to look at what we do, and that way you will tell your friends, listen, this isn't bro science, it's not bullshit. The guys back up what they say. I verified that they back up what they say, and that's the kind of information we want you to put out there. Solid every damn time, factual as much as we possibly can every damn time, and just now and again we talk about our own experiences as well. Let us know what you think, guys. Show some love. Subscribe to the podcast and give us some likes and help us boost us up without the bullshit and the bro science you see elsewhere. Back to you, Steve.
So let's get this thing started. So I kind of separated these different dosage ideas into A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So it's one, two, three, four, five, 6, 7 different options that this person talks about. So you probably listening to this and you're like confused, like what the hell is Steve talking about it? So I'm going to give you the first option, and it kind of goes in order. It starts out at 100 milligrams a week of TRT, and this is kind of he's kind of stacking these these cycles by milligrams. So the first one, the least amount, is 100 milligrams of TRT. And look, our bodies produce naturally the equivalent of somewhere between 80 and 125 milligrams a week of testosterone. So 100 milligrams a week TRT as a bottom line dose is actually quite accurate. But here's the thing, you got to keep this in mind. And I'll drop some knowledge on this that a lot of you may not know, and definitely a lot of your gym bros aren't going to understand or know. But if you have normal testosterone levels where you're producing your own testosterone levels at a pretty good amount, let's say 500, 600, 700 nanograms per deciliter, okay? Even 400 nanograms per deciliter. So somewhere between 4 to 700 would be what most of you are going to be at in a natural state. If you go on 100 milligrams of testosterone per week, or any 100 milligrams of any anabolic steroid per week, you're going to shut yourself down. So that testosterone that you're producing on your own, those hormones that you're producing on your own, are going to get shut down pretty quickly within the first 2, 3 weeks. And then you're going to be dependent on the exogenous hormones that you're using. So it's very important to realize that. So, really, if your testosterone levels are where they should be, there's no point in just doing a cycle at 100 milligrams a week. If you're going to shut yourself down, and this is my
Yeah,
point, you might as well jack it up to at least 3, 4, 500 milligrams a week because you're going to get shut down either way. So, to replace the testosterone you're producing with just 100 milligrams is sort of pointless. Now, the only way it's not pointless is if you have naturally low testosterone levels. So
yeah,
you can go get blood work done and see where your testosterone levels are at. If they're artificially, not artificially, if they are low, like under 250 or at 200
yes,
or under 200, I've seen blood work really, really low. I've seen blood work in the high double digits in men. So that's the blood work of an 80 or 90-year old, and that's the blood work of a female in a lot of cases. So that's very, very low. Not much higher than a female. Females have lower than that, but you know what I mean. So in that situation, you might be better off just go ahead and going on TRT. But that's something you definitely want to take a look at. So that's my view on that first one, Mobster. Give me your observation.
yeah. I mean, look, the particular member in question, Steve, is 23 years of age. So I'm not entirely sure, given what you've just said, which I agree on, of course, why he's even thinking about the suggestion of 100 milligrams a week TRT, even what he describes as we'll get into momentarily, the sports TRT. He's 23 years of age. He should have the best testosterone levels, almost between there and maybe age 30, if he's in great condition, that is ever going to have. Ever. Literally, biologically, should be kind of at his peak. If he's a healthy individual, if he's got relatively low body fat, if he eats well, if he trains well, he should have the best testosterone levels ever without doing anything. He's not training too hard. He's not over dieted. He's not massively obese. These should be the best he's ever going to get. Arguably, if he was an older gentleman, if, as Steve says, his testosterone levels had dropped off, if he had some medical condition or he was massively obese, etc., then perhaps, bearing in mind the obesity thing, he could just get back into shape. All things considered, 100 milligrams a week is quite reasonable. Steve and I have argued this again and again and again. And I think there's a popularity of opinion versus a factual opinion to say things like 200 milligrams or 300 milligrams a week for TRT and I'm set for life, etc. And this is, and I'll include myself here, Steve, at 200 milligrams a week. This is kind of where we like to be on the forums, that we can feel good, etc. But as Steve and I have pointed out on multiple previous shows, the reality of the situation is that for the most part, you're somewhere between a decent clinic that's looked at your blood markers, that's done blood tests, that knows where your testosterone levels are at, and gives you some advice on things that perhaps you can fix in your lifestyle is only going to give you somewhere between 90 and 120 milligrams. If we average that out, Steve, it's 105 milligrams. So, yeah, look, 200 milligrams, 300 milligrams is kind of rare with these clinics. Let's move on to sports TRT. Now, he makes a suggestion here, and then arguably, Steve, it's kind of reasonable. 250 milligrams a week sports TRT. I've seen way too many sports TRT suggested at 400 milligrams. And let's be honest again, Steve, what is sports TRT? Is that a different level from TRT that you're doing briefly? At the upper end, 400 milligrams, you're creeping into cycle levels. So you have to be careful. He's actually kind of conservative here. I will also say, Steve, with either TRT or sports TRT, Beligas has some great options in regards to both of those. And I'm just looking at a couple of choices here. They've got some testcypionate, Steve, which they call SIPO products. Testosterone enanthate. They do a 450 and a 300 milligram option called Evo test. Both of those would be great, and obviously you would dose those accordingly, so half a mil, three quarters of a mil, etc. In regards to your requirements. What do you think about the whole sports TRT concept, Steve? And what about the number that you suggested, which is actually low compared to what I've seen elsewhere? It's almost reasonable.
Well, 15 years ago or even 12 years ago, this was unheard of, where doctors were prescribing sports TRT. But with the amount of uh, TRT clinics that have popped up everywhere, and the amount because this is something that's more male oriented, really the government has kind of turned looked the other way. Of course, if it was females trying to get some type of medical treatment, they would start putting in regulations on that. But because it's males, it's kind of like Viagra and Cialis. They're like, oh, dick drugs. Well, we don't want to ban dick drugs. We got to keep dick drugs going. So when you're basically dominate, you have a male dominated lawmakers, they're going to be more friendly toward this type of thing because many of them themselves are on testosterone replacement therapy. So this is the reason why we've seen sports TRT kind of grow over the past decade. And sports TRT long term is not a good idea because what's going to end up happening is your blood's going to thicken up, your kidneys are going to take a beating, your liver is going to take a beating, your brain is going to take a beating, and there's going to be more inflammation in your body. So really head to toe, your body is going to take a beating. So long term, it's not a healthy option, but we're seeing this a lot. And what we're seeing is a lot of guys who are cruising on a sports TRT level. So they'll blast a cycle, then they'll go back to a sports TRT amount. Now,
Yes.
For a year or two is one thing, but if you're doing this over the course of 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, it's going to catch up to you
Yes.
very, very quickly. I've seen guys even on 125 milligrams of testosterone a week cruising or TRT having high hematocrit levels. And the problem with that's your blood thickening, and that can open yourself up to blood clots. That can open yourself up for stroke, especially as you get older. So you really have to be smarter when it comes to doing stuff like this. And sports TRT is not a safe option for the long term, even though guys will argue with that. But we've seen the evidence that it's not.
Yeah. Very quickly, Steve. So it just occurred to me as we've been talking. The only argument, and I actually don't agree with this, is the difference between TRT for the average Joe who doesn't work out and sports TRT for the Joes that are in the gym and smashing the weights. But again, there's too many differences. And one of the things that's annoying for me when I'm talking about these things online is guys that are blasting and cruising and confusing the terminology with TRT or sports TRT. It's almost like you're allowing yourself to do stuff that you shouldn't be doing. Just on the thickening of the blood thing that Steve talks about, even without TRT, I should be, and I am currently, and I'm trying to make this a habit, be using a baby aspirin every single day to keep my blood thinner and stay healthy and have better blood marker numbers and blood pressure issues. So again, it's that thing also sometimes with the guys of thinking these things are relatively short term, but can easily turn into 1, 2, 3, 4, even 5 years while they're doing the gym stuff. And then obviously there different things come along in life and they change and they move on. But the reality of this situation is those timescales are too long, really. And there might be potential issues. And the obvious issue is, Steve, is just complete and utter shutdown and suppression. So you do need TRT instead of sports TRT, whatever. You do need something to replace the testosterone that you've suppressed because you thought it was temporary. So you need to have that kind of control over what you're doing, a proper understanding of what you're doing, and then especially a proper understanding of the potential impact that comes from playing around with your natural testosterone levels by, in your mind, temporarily using something like this. Well, in reality, it could easily be for life. The next one here, Steve. Yeah, the next one, Steve, is 500 milligrams a week as a beginner cycle. I will argue against this and for this. The four part, Steve, is that for the longest possible time, especially when people decided they went down the injectable route, there was a suggestion of, and you and I just done a show on this, the idea that he was going to use testosterone for the first time, nearly always most people's choice for an injectable cycle, regardless of whether they actually needed testosterone specifically as opposed to other choices. And 500 milligrams seemed to be the template. The reality is, oral cycles, especially for beginners, are quite common. Maybe not as common as they used to be, but certainly common enough, even now. And these are rarely up and around. I would actually argue you don't really want an oral cycle to be totaling 500 milligrams a week. And here's the thing, and this is actually something I thought about pre-show, that these numbers that we could talk about today is a nice, fun topic to discuss. But the reality of the situation should always be, why not do for you, the individual listening to this show, if you decide to go down a PD route, what works for you? Arguably, Steve, the length of time that I've been training, the length of time you've been training, we should be, according to some armchair theories, be using multiple grams per week at this point versus what we still do. What still works for me is around 1,000 milligrams and has worked for me probably for the last 10 years. I've only recently gone ever so slightly above that, and I still felt better and got leaner and quicker and faster, etc., etc., etc. Even at my size, with around 1,000 milligrams total, 800 to 1,000 milligrams. So the idea that beginners need specifically 500 milligrams is bullshit. Most oral cycles would be less. And I would argue that, for example, why not have someone who's never done a cycle ever, Steve? We're not talking about TRT. We're not talking about anything else, sports TRT. We're talking about literally someone, first cycle out of the gate, 500 milligrams. They might be perfectly fine and get an absolutely amazing response, put on 5 or 10 pounds of muscle with an injectable cycle of only 250 or even 300 milligrams a week. Because even at 250, arguably, that's twice what they would produce. In fact, more than twice. 300 milligrams, we're getting into 3 times, 4 times what someone who's got low natural levels of testosterone is. And you're still at the upper end, double, arguably, even in someone who's got the best testosterone levels. And if you can't grow on your first cycle with essentially, it's like adding a turbo to a car, Steve, doubling the speed, doubling the horsepower, doubling your testosterone levels, and all things else being equal, training and diet, you should see amazing results. And in fact, arguably against it, I would argue that the bro science here, with regards to the next point, is almost carved in stone. It's been said again and again and again, and I'll agree with this for the most part, that for the majority of people that have never used PEDs, and specifically anabolic steroids, your first cycle is nearly always, and arguably, Steve, where we don't know what the fuck we're doing because we're learning about how our bodies work, and probably the least amount that we're probably going to do in our lives. Very few people are crazy enough to go hardcore straight away. Is when you get the best results. So you didn't know what you were doing. You're still learning how to train. You're still learning how to eat. You only took a moderate amount of testosterone, various forms, anabolic steroids, and you still got fucking great results. So what do you think about the idea, Steve, of having to have 500 milligrams as a beginner?
So yeah, like you said, most of the people, though, you go with the Beligas testosterone as a first cycle. It's a very popular option, 500 milligrams, but you don't have to. You can do the Belagas Equipoise or Belagas Prima Bowl in that 500 milligrams for a first cycle as well. And as Mobster mentioned, you can do Belagas orals and stack in some orals as a Kickstarter or as a finisher, or just stack it along with it. Anavor or T-Bowl would be great options, nice mild options. So that's kind of leads into our next one, which is the D option, which is 1,000 milligrams a week, moderate cycle for bulking slash recomp, he says. And this is a type of cycle that people will aim for after a few cycles under the belt. Now, with me, when I started my steroid journey, it was my second cycle. I jumped right into about 1,000 milligrams. The way I did it, I did a bulker, I did testosterone, I did DECA, and I did Dynable. So in this case, he's saying bulking slash recomp. So that would be a good bulking option. In my case, I did 500 milligrams of testosterone, and I did 400 milligrams of DECA, and I did about 20 or 30 milligrams a day of Dianabol as a Kickstarter. So that came out to about 1,000 milligrams, give or take. And you can do that. You can do two steroids around 500 milligrams each, or you can do three steroids around 300 to 400 milligrams a week each. And that will give you that option. So, for example, you could do Belagas testosterone if you wanted to use testosterone as your base. And then you could add Equipoise, Primo, Masteron, or Deca, depending if you're going for a recomp or if you're going for more of a bulking option. So the Primo and Masteron from Belagas would be good for recomp and hardening. And then the Equipoise and Deca could be used for as a bulking option. Or you could use the Equipoise for, a little bit of both. Maybe a lean bulker or a lean recomper, or kind of recomping slash, lean bulk type of thing. So you can be more flexible with the Equipoise. But that would be a good option. And you can always add in, as we did in the last example, some of the Belagas orals. You can add in the Dynable, as I mentioned, if you're looking for the bulk. You can add in the Anavar if you're looking to recomp. You can add in Turinabol if you're looking to recomp. So there's different options. You can also add in Winstrol toward the end of the cycle, and that would be a good finisher to the cycle. So, Mobster, give us a good 1,000 milligram a week moderate cycle for bulking slash recomp that you would recommend.
So regular listeners to our podcast, Steve, will know that I'm a huge fan for bulking, especially if I get my appetite on point, my diet on point, of Sustanon and Deca. The success I've had, especially in the past, as I was moving up to my maximum body weight, with both those two, has been absolutely fucking outstanding. And I'm just looking again at Beligas here with their SUS or SUS test 250, which is their kind of Sustanon, and they do a Deca 500 option and a Deca 300 option. I've literally the last cycle but one, because I'm back on TRT. The previous cycle, not the one I've just done, the one before, would be circa, as I said earlier, on 850 to 1,000 milligrams. And that would be dead easy, Steve. Doing 1 mil of the SUS test 250 and 1 mil of the DECA 300 option, and do it every 4 days. And if you average the numbers out, I believe for myself, when I've done that recently, that averaged out to 1,050 milligrams. I think I went slightly over that, arguably because I was also including Proviron at 25 milligrams a day. And again, typically, most of my cycles recently have been 4 to 8 weeks, regardless of whether I've been bulking or cutting or training for strength or whatever else. I think the most recent cycle was 8 weeks. And on injectables and using those particular options, 1, 8 weeks was fine for my particular target. And 2, with Sustanon especially, you're looking at a relatively long time in the system. So one of the things I would, word of advice is, and I see someone posted on this the other day, and I've done it myself. I've been guilty of this, forgetting that the longer acting esters will be in your system 2 or 3 weeks, and noticeable 2 or 3 weeks after the end of a cycle. I think I posted on this last year or the year before, so I couldn't understand why I was still strong, because the penny hadn't dropped and it should have done. Arguably, Steve, is not a million miles away. Recomposition, trend options, and again, Beligas has got multiple trend options. We would actually want it to be a moderate cycle. I would argue if I was running trend for recomposition, I'd want to get it under 1,000 milligrams total, probably only looking at 300 milligrams of trend, and then whatever else I was using with that particular combination. And again, the argument for 1,000 milligrams is kind of bro science insofar as, again, you need to know at this point, with our advice, come onto the forums and check us out, what works for you. If the previous cycle was 300 milligrams, that's all you've ever done, and you've got great results, then a bulk and recomposition doesn't need to be 1,000 milligrams. It just needs to be the right products from Beligas, the right diet, the right kind of training, and just manipulate their variables. And of course, if we had you go at 5, 6, 7, 800 milligrams, and you gained a little bit, then maybe we could push you up to 1,000 milligrams. It's about what is right for you, not what the person's put here together, a kind of average list of what is seen across different forums and on social media and on Facebook, versus actual advice that is specific to the individual. Because ectomorph, endomorph, mesomorph, fat, thin, lean, training for strength, not training correctly, poor diet, you're going to get different results from somebody who's got the right frame, eating right, training right, and has got a good working knowledge of what's worked for them in the past. That's really important. It goes on to, and here's an interesting one, Steve, because it could actually be kind of right in this one. 2,000 milligrams a week for the advanced gym rat cycle. Now, there's no specific aim here. Is the gym rat trying to get in shape? Is the gym rat trying to add muscle? Is the gym rat trying to get stronger? But what we see with the cycles, and I'd actually argue here, Steve, 2,000 milligrams is probably a combination of everything. It won't be as simple as a Beligas testosterone, a Beligas trim, etc., etc. It's probably going to be everything they're doing in combination. It might include kickstarters. It will be specific to their requirements, like getting lean, gaining mass, and so on and so forth. And I think an advanced gym rat is far more likely to be using growth hormone, for example, or other ancillary particular drugs. You might see a peptide starting to creep into there. And there's actually something else as well, Steve. I'll say this too, because we're going to talk about competition cycles and pro cycles shortly. At 2,000 milligrams a week, I've seen a few pros that are incredibly genetically blessed only looking at this kind of number. It's kind of become a thing where the idea is that if you get more advanced, you need more steroids to grow, to get so on and so forth. But the reality situation is most professional bodybuilders are not looking, and I'm thinking specifically of the shorter one, Steve. It's no good becoming 250 or 300 pounds if it completely messes up your physique. There's no point getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger if your aesthetics become horrendous and you don't win any titles. So again, you're still looking to look at a cycle that works for you and enhances, especially as you start to get into this kind of stuff, enhances your physique rather than just throwing more and more steroids at it. There will always be, and we'll touch upon that again shortly, some that require more, some that genuinely need to use more to get a little bit more advanced, a little more genetically blessed in terms of their response, they're a little bit more muscular versus perhaps where they started from. So there's a big thing there. 2,000 milligrams a week, Steve. Again, for me, combination of steroids, maybe. I see a bunch recently just on this thing where these guys are in great shape, but they're handling the 1.5, the 1.6 that I tried recently a lot better than I did. But they're leaner, more vascular, and so on. So, what do you think about this as an advanced gym rat cycle?
Well, let's first talk about what a gym rat is. And a gym rat is someone who's always in the gym. This is the way I look at it. Someone, they're always in the gym. When you get there, you see them. When you leave, you see them. So they're basically in there all the fucking time. They practically live there. And it's similar to the way a rat would live behind a restaurant. You know, you see people who work in the restaurant industry, they have names of different rats because they're so used to seeing the same rats hang out, you know, in their kitchen or behind the restaurant mobster, and they've named them. And I know people that have worked in the kitchens at these restaurants, and they name the different rats. They based on what they
Yeah,
look like. They know based
yeah,
on their ears or based on their face, or maybe they have a crooked tooth or something, or a tail, a curled tail. So it's the same thing. So you have these gym rats, they practically live there. So they've earned the right to run a higher dose cycle. And for
mm,
them at this point, 1,000 milligrams just isn't getting them where they want to go. So for
yes,
them,
yes,
they'll want to run more. So in a lot of times the types of steroids they run might be a little more harsher. So now they're running the
yeah,
trenbolones, they're running the anadrols, they're running the
yeah,
superdrols. They're running the Winstrolls. They're running the more harsher ones and they're combining them and they're
Yes.
stacking them. So, yeah, you want to get in there?
Yeah, I was going to say for me, and I can actually think of a couple of individuals whose names I don't know, not as regularly, with vest tops on and shorts or tight leggings, and would have, for most people, if you didn't know what they were doing with steroids, if you didn't know how hard they trained, etc., or not, as the case may be, would be for the most part someone you see getting out of a car or in a supermarket, kind of muscular looking, and they wear clothes to enhance that particular look, and they have nicely shaped delts, good shaped legs, etc., etc. But they're not giants. You might see a little bit too much acne, and so on and so forth. And I think sometimes what's happened here as well, Steve, and this is another reason why you might be looking at 2,000 milligrams, and it will always be a stack. It won't be one or two steroids. It's going to be multiple steroids, multiple products. The problem might be here, and the reason why 2,000 milligrams might be required is they probably haven't come off, and their sensitivity and response to steroids has probably come somewhat negated. And as fun as it is to occasionally have a chat, and I can think of my local gym owner in this particular regards, where what would be a big cycle for me is a low cycle for them. And what is a big cycle for me would probably put me in a fucking box in a hole in the ground. And yet their physical structure, etc. I'm lucky that I have a big bone structure. I'm lucky I have the height to carry weight. But on the other hand, they're always kind of in shape. They're always, as Steve says, in the gym. Perhaps some of their identities tied up with looking a certain particular way. And I say that as a strength athlete, not as a bodybuilder. So that might be me, my bias. But yeah, I mean, honestly, in that particular regard, Steve, they're probably going to be doing more of the next two that we're going to look at versus the first two. But I suspect, as I said, it's come down to being on something, cruising all the time, and perhaps less, and this might even just be a genetic thing, less of a sensitivity to lower doses and simpler stacks and cycles. So they almost need, and this will always happen, there's always going to be a difference, more to take in order to just gain a few more pounds of muscle or continue to look the way they are. And of course, as they move through life and as they get older and so on and so forth. The next one, Steve, and me and you've done quite a few shows on this, on the next two indeed, the 3,000 milligrams a week competition cycle. Look, here's a thing that some people don't understand when it comes to competition cycles. Let's imagine that a person that's either already a professional, but not necessarily at the highest level, or competing to win a pro card or win a local show and so on and so forth, works with a well-respected, knowledgeable prep coach. So competition cycles can easily be, when I'm not actually a fan of this for most people, the minimum is probably going to be 16 weeks. And I know a lot of competition cycles where the thought process starts at 21 weeks out. And competition cycles are not straightforward. It's not literally product A, product B, product C, 20 weeks. It typically goes along the following lines. You will have some part of the early non-cycle part, assuming that you're not blasting and cruising, say, for example, back in the old days, Steve, you'd look at something that's going to add mass right at the beginning, let's say for the first 4 weeks, and let's call it a 20-week cycle. That still gives you 16 weeks. At the 4-week part, you start to manipulate your diet. You start to take out the junk, you start to take out the bonus foods, the refeeds, etc., and you start literally just cleaning your diet up. Let's see what happens. Cardio increases a little bit, and so on. And this is where you might start the change from the previous PEDs to something different, might moderate the dosages, etc. What you're looking to see is, let's see the shape of how I look now at this particular point. So you're still 16 weeks out from the competition. As you get closer to the competition, this is going to be manipulated again. Doses will vary, products will be put in, pulled out, longer rests will be dropped so that they're cleared out of the system, shorter rests will be started to introduce. And what really, really happens, and where the magic happens, and I'll bring Steve in for some of these points, is in the last few weeks. You can literally go online and see champion, which genetically best, high level competition Olympia or Arnold level open class athletes transformed, Steve, in the last few weeks. Better lysine, better tan, better oil, etc., sweating, and so on and so forth. The intensity changes, and the diet at this point is being cut back to the bone. Nothing extra is added, nothing superfluous is added. The prep coach, if they're a good prep coach, has got you only on short acting esters. They're starting to play with your water. They're starting to play with your carbohydrate levels. Your cardio is fucking insane, whether it's steps or stairmaster or rowing or riding a bike or whatever else. And the grind, if it hasn't already become a grind, is fucking absolute at this point. It's all the fucking time. I'm reminded of Samson Duelda saying between the Olympia and a recent Arnold 2025 that the last few weeks were hell. He's top, he's Mr. Olympia, and he said it's just a grind every single day, but this is what we do. This is why we do it. So 20 weeks, Steve, you will not be on the same PEDs that you started at the beginning. So the 3,000 milligrams a week, I'm thinking this is someone that wants to turn professional. Not every person that's going to step on a stage needs 3 grams of anything a week. So what do you think about the change of the PEDs, the dosing, and everything else that's combined for any person that competes? And we've got a handful of people on our forums that are looking to get pro cards, looking to compete at the highest level.
Yeah, and 3,000 milligrams a week is absolutely brutal. So what you'll see is similar to what Mobster mentioned. I'll kind of I'll kind of echo what he was saying. When you're working with these coaches, the coaches want you to get results. So of course,
Yes.
they're going to want you to use steroids in a lot of cases because they want you to improve. They want you to rehire them. They want word of mouth. They want people to say, wow, that guy's a monster. I wonder who his coach is. So of course, they're going to want to put you on steroids. That just makes sense. So what Mobster is saying, let's say you've got 16 weeks or 20 weeks to your competition, they might put you on 1,500 for the first 8 or 10 weeks and then raise you to 2,000, 2,500, and then into the 3,000 range for the end of the 8 to 10 weeks. Or they could do the opposite. They could start you off front loading at a full 3,000 milligrams and then dropping you down to 2,000 or even 1,000 milligrams as you get closer to the competition. Some of my clients that I've dealt with over the years, it's really helped them to kind of actually start more higher. And then as you get closer to the competition, actually start dropping your steroids because it kind of drops away the water retention. That's an obvious trick. But it also drops away the inflammation. So you actually look better by dropping the amount of milligrams you're getting. And it's going to be a miserable experience a lot of times because you're really cutting your carbs. You're raising your carbs, raising your carbs, raising your carbs, and you're cutting your carbs. And then you're going to your competition really feeling depleted and dehydrated. So by actually dropping the dosing, you'll actually, it'll kind of offset those negative side effects. So that's kind of a trick we've seen guys do, especially with steroids like Trenbolone and obviously with steroids like testosterone. And you can also manipulate things by doing different esters. Maybe you start off with longer esters, then as you get closer to competition, you switch to the shorter esters. The good thing about Beligas, and this is why a lot of professionals use them, is they
Yes.
have both. They have the longer
Yes.
esters and shorter esters. So you have more flexibility as you get into it. So I'll bring you in, Mobster, shortly, but let me
Yeah,
just let me
let me
just
just think about on this again, Steve. Look, this is the point by which, if you were training yourself and you wasn't working with a prep coach, I'll talk about the prep coach thing again in a second. You should know what works for you. I would never have anybody, and I don't care who they are and how genetically blessed they are, literally jump in at the deep end and throw them a competition stack without knowing how certain PEDs work for them. Have you tried this? What was the effects? What was the results you had? What was the dosing? Even to the source, what products were they using? Was it Beligas or was it something I've never heard of? Is that product that they used before properly dosed and so on, right? So you absolutely need to know that one of the tricks, and I believe a decent prep coach would do this, is if you get this prep coach way ahead of the competition, and I'll talk about the prep coach thing again in a second, I would have you try a couple of things that perhaps you hadn't tried before, but way before the competition, Steve. I want to know how you do on this protocol I'm about to give you. I don't want to be fucking asking you 2 weeks before you're due to step on stage if you've tried product X at this amount of milligrams. I need to know that stuff. I need to know how your body responds. Let's have almost a practice run of stuff like that. One of the issues, and I have seen this when it's come up as an option, and funny enough, it was women, not male bodybuilders, but occasionally, I think one recent one was a male bodybuilder or bodybuilders, where they were working with someone within the industry. I hadn't heard of them, but apparently the competing athletes had in both cases. Whether that person had put themselves forward as a prep coach or whether someone had recommended. And what ended up happening, I think in the most recent example with the men, is that they found was all on the same goddamn protocol, every single one. Now, arguably, there are commonalities in how things work for most people. We've done shows. We said, "Oh, this works for 90%. This amount will work for 90%." Yes, there's always going to be variables, but again, you're getting close to competition. So the idea that everybody should be getting individual advice and individual requirements to what they're doing and how their body responds. Let's talk about the last one, Steve. And I know, yeah. So I'll bring Steve back in for this one. We're going to have a bit of fun with the next one, which is the pro cycle, and I mean the true pro cycle. So come back in for this one. Finish this one off, Steve.
Yeah, and I just wanted to mention when it comes to a competition cycle at 3,000 milligrams. Look, this is the type of cycle where we start getting into the chemical warfare territory. So you're basically trying to outgun your opponent when you step on stage. So 3,000 milligrams a week. Look, it's a lot of gear. And 99.9% of you listening to this never, ever, ever, ever will need to use this much gear. We're talking about you're trying to win the regional competition in your state. And I'm not talking about South Dakota or North Dakota state. I'm talking about a big state. We're talking California, Florida, New York, big states with a lot of people, Texas, big competitions where people from all over the state and even from other states drive in to compete against you. That's where you would get into 3,000 milligrams. So 99% of you don't have to do this. And we've seen the autopsy reports. We've done past podcasts on these autopsies from these guys who have been running this much gear and who have died ahead of their competition. So in these situations, what they would be doing is they do a couple steroids, 1,200 milligrams, Beligas equipoise, Beligas mosteron, and then they fill in the rest with tren, of course, and then they'd also run orals. And then a lot of times they'd also throw in testosterone for good measure. So we're talking about they're doing, 2, 3, 4 injectables, and then they're throwing in orals on top of it, and then they're doing growth
Steve,
hormone as
I'll
well.
just come in very quickly. I know this for a fact. Orals, and I'm just thinking, for example, Anavar, used recently by a competitor that I'm aware of, 100 milligrams a day. So that's 700 milligrams just of Anavar per week in the last 2 weeks before a competition. And that's just the oral. That's a single oral. That's nothing else. That's not growth hormone. That's not insulin. That was a single oral as part of that particular person's competition stack. And again, this is someone that's only trying to win, as Steve said, a regional. So yeah, I mean, it's going to come. That Steve said, I agree 100%. The great and vast majority of our audience won't step on stage, and the great and vast majority of us do not ever need to be running 3,000 milligrams a week total. And even those that do, it should only be for a relatively short period of time. The biggest issue, Steve, sometimes is when they almost won a regional, they're still in great shape, and they extend the cycle to go and rush off and do another local competition that might allow them to compete at that kind of level. And then you're staying on perhaps too long, and you're really, really getting into the sort of potential for health issues and bad markers in your bloods, etc., etc. So again, listeners, it's fun to talk about this as it will be for the next topic. But you need to understand, if you ain't getting on stage, and if you're just someone that likes to look good and get into great shape, 3,000 milligrams is an absolute fucking no-no. And if you are looking to get in shape, you have to weigh up. I use the sort of the work versus the reward. Is winning a regional title going to change your life or just give you personal satisfaction? And if the health issue outweighs the reward, then why the hell are you making that kind of decision, mate? So again, fun to talk about. great to understand, and arguably, Steve, as Steve said earlier, almost walking chemical test, which allows perhaps the rest of us to learn how things work, but at a more moderate level, so that we can apply some of the work that they've done to ourselves, but without needing to use 3 milligrams or 3,000 milligrams a week. Let's talk about now, Stephen. We've got a unfortunately passed away former buddy of ours from the forums who was a professional in his particular class, a former WABA pro as he was. And we're going to talk about what we call the Monstro cycle. And Monstro, aka Marco Louis, the late Marco Louis, Monstro cycle was a true, as per the suggestion here, 5,000 milligrams a week pro cycle. And even he would admit, Steve, that wasn't all year round. This is literally run up the competition. And the 5,000 milligrams a week, Steve, was only the anabolics. It didn't include, I believe it might have included some of the peptides, didn't include the insulin, didn't include growth hormone. These were on top. Let's talk about just how, and I'll bring you back in and I'll jump in from time to time, just how fucking crazy, but also indicative in a lot of professionals of that 5,000 milligrams a week at that level.
Yeah, and you can go watch videos of Monstro. Marco Louis, see his Instagram page. I mean, he was 5'5", I believe, Mobster. And how much did he weigh at his peak?
He
About
wasn't. He wasn't. I mean, look. Let me just jump in on this as well. He was a muscular 15-year-old teenager back when he started. He had a body most of you would kill for when he was in his teens, and in his own
yeah.
admission was just eating
But I'm
mama's
trying to
food.
describe what. So he was
I
five.
believe he was around maximum body weight would probably be 230, but on
Yeah.
stage probably
So
around
you got to
200.
think about it: 5'5", 230 or 225, but his
Yeah.
body fat level was like
Oh,
at
very
four
low
percent,
all the
four
time. Yeah.
four or 5%. So if you look at
Yeah.
videos of him, he's walking around places, with no shirt on, and people are
Yeah.
just like blown away at this guy.
Yeah.
He was absolutely massive. So I'm just trying to give you an idea of what he looked like. And yes, to have that physique, it not only takes amazing genetics, and he had those
Yeah.
amazing
Oh,
Portuguese
he did.
genetics,
Yes.
but he also needed those anabolic steroids to help get him there. And he was
Mm.
someone who ate a very strict island Portuguese diet. He lived out on an island. He ate a lot
Yeah.
of protein, a lot of good quality vegetables,
Yeah.
a lot of good quality carbs. He wasn't eating junk food. It was unheard of on his island to even have junk food the way we do in America or fast food joints. There, his island probably doesn't even have a single fast food restaurant, Mobster.
I've seen photographs, Steve, and
So,
I don't think I've ever seen a McDonald's or a KFC or anything in
no,
the background
they
when he
would
was
never
doing.
allow that type of crap in their island because they don't want corporate companies to come in and take over things. So,
Mm.
so basically, he ate perfect. He trained his balls off. He took
Yep.
the steroid. He did what he had to do to look the way he looked, and it was definitely an addiction to him to look a certain way.
Yes.
So yes, he was using 500 milligrams minimum, and this is we can kind of go
5,000, Steve. 5,000, not 500.
yeah 5,000
5,000.
milligrams a week
Yeah.
yeah
Yeah.
of just the injectable. So let's just go over.
Yes.
This is an example of one of his cycles that he actually posted, and
Yes.
he would tell people what he was using, and he would post pictures of the gear. So I mean, this was what he was using. He wasn't bullshitting. Um, and as Monster said, he did pass away. So this is a cycle that is basically suicidal. If you're
Yeah.
gonna do something like this,
He was
because
41, Steve, which is no fucking age at all.
I think he was like 40,
No.
46 actually.
Yeah, but even
Yeah,
so, if it's
mid 40s. Yeah.
if we could argue about it, but yeah, listen, 41,
So you're
46.
short. So he's shortened his
That's not
life
enough.
about. He shortened his life about 25 or 30 years
Yes.
by doing what he did.
Yes.
Because average lifespan for someone from where he
Three
was
score and
from.
10, Steve. Easy.
All right, so let me kind of go over this one. Do you want to do it, or you want me to do it?
No, no,
As far
read
as
the list out.
okay,
I'll jump in when you're
okay.
reading the list. You've got it, I haven't. You
if
read
you
it.
if you would let me get a
We're
word in
being
it,
honest
yeah.
here, listeners.
We're gonna have
You read
your.
it.
Yeah, all right, so let's
Yeah.
start off. This was interesting. Testosterone enanthate, 2,100 milligrams. Again, I don't know how he came up with 2,100 milligrams.
Yeah.
So testosterone. So he liked testosterone. A lot of these guys
Yes.
don't. A lot of these guys will swap in equipoise instead of testosterone, which is a testosterone derivative. But he
Yeah.
himself really loved testosterone. He was a big proponent of
Yes.
testosterone
Yes.
when he would post. So 21 milligrams, trenbolone 1400 milligrams a week.
Wow.
That is a lot. Like me myself, if I run 250 milligrams of tren a
Yeah.
week, just tren 250, I would feel the effect.
Let me jump in on that trend one, Steve. Right. So, for those of you that have not listened to our show before, and there are other shows where we've talked about trend, we talked about chemical warfare. Steve used that phrase earlier on. I would suggest, and we've seen the other stacks of cycles that you and I have discussed when we talked about pros. Steve mentioned the autopsy, etc., earlier on, where we've seen blood tests come back with results for the PEDs that that particular athlete was on. Anything over 1,000 milligrams, even at the highest fucking level, is really, really, really pushing it out there. And the argument, Monstro Marco Louis would have benefited somewhat by being relatively lean all the time versus being out of condition and slightly fat, even 10%, 12%, 15%, because he was always under that level. I can't imagine for myself, and talking to athletes and talking to people that compete, and talking to strongmen that are at the world strongest man level, using much past 600 milligrams, never mind 1,000 or 1,400. The potential for side effects is huge. The biggest issue here, Steve, even if it was for a short period of time, is the length of time that he's on it. Steve's talk about tren as a relationship killer. I just can't put myself in Monstro's shoes at any day of the week, no matter what I'm thinking in terms of my ambitions previously, now, or in the future, where I would be running 1,400 milligrams. And I would argue again, looking back at the cycles that we've seen and discussed, and the autopsies, etc., and the blood tests, the very few top professionals are really pushing up to the 1,400 milligrams. But again, I have no reason to doubt, because of how he was and how he came across, and even on the odd occasion when we butted heads and argued about things, I have no reason to doubt that that's what he was doing. So fucking hell, Steve. Well, just that on its own. Never mind with anything else to bring it over the 5,000 milligrams. Just that one single steroids, even
Well, we're
below
gonna. Well,
it's just crazy.
The third one
Go
is
on.
Masteron, 1400 milligrams a week. So
Jesus, again, yeah.
between the testosterone trend and Masteron, we're right there at 4,900, right? So because the
Yes.
testosterone, yeah. So 3,500, and so we're at 39. We're at I'm sorry,
4,009.
yeah,
4,009.
4,900. So that doesn't count the orals, the other
Yes.
stuff. So he's
Yes.
running 3 orals, which include Winstrol at 100 milligrams a day, Superdrol 30 milligrams a day, and Proviron at 50 milligrams a day. Again, I can go
Yep.
back to the Winstrol, 100 milligrams a day,
It's a
absolutely
lot.
crushed.
Yeah.
Crushed
Yeah.
my joints, and it crushed my head
Yes.
here. So I believe he was bald, right?
Oh, he was a
Yeah.
bold mate. Yeah. He
So
was
that's why. So you can
no
imagine
eyebrows. Yeah.
someone like me who's not prone to hair loss, even on 25 milligrams of
Yeah.
Winstrol a day, shedded my hair. So you can imagine with him at 100 milligrams, what it would do to his hair on top of the
What
other
was the
stuff.
point of the Proviron at 50, Steve? Because 25 milligrams is perfect for, not, again, 99% of our listeners. 25 milligrams a day will absolutely boost your free testosterone.
Yeah.
But the fucking amount of testosterone combination he's got in his system already, just a Masteron, again, 1,400 milligrams of Masteron to harden up, amongst other things. Motherfucker was sub 10% all day long, every single day of the week, all the time that we knew him. So the idea that he needed his muscles, for most people using Masteron and the Proviron, to free up more free testosterone, or so benefiting from those other drugs that he was taking, or to harden up his already hard muscular physique, again, under 10% every single day of the week, all the time that we knew him. It's
So if you
I
count the
can only,
orals, if you
yeah,
count the
and
orals,
read the orals out, Steve, again. So you go on.
yeah. So if you, I'm saying if you count the orals, that's about 2,000 milligrams a week of orals. So
So
you're
that's close to 7,000, 6,900.
yeah, so you're at about 7,000. That doesn't count the growth
Jesus. Yeah.
hormone. He's on 10 IUs before bed and 10 IUs fasted
Yes.
in the morning. So that's 20
Yes.
IUs per day of growth hormone. And he's on IGF, 200 IUs pre workout. And
Yes.
he's on insulin, of course, because you got to use
Yes.
insulin if you're using that much growth hormone.
Yes.
And he's using many more ancillaries and many more drugs. He's using Clen. He's using some heart medications, which obviously didn't do enough for him. It
No.
probably helped, slow down the process, but it still maybe it slowed down his aging by like a couple years, but obviously it didn't do enough. So I mean, this is all these other things on top of it that he was using. I mean, if we're gonna really, just between the injectables and the orals, as you said, we're at what, almost 7,000 milligrams a
Yes.
week of
Yes.
of
Six
gear.
thousand nine hundred. Yeah.
So it's absolutely, this is the chemical warfare that you need to
What's the
do.
phrase that we've seen used in professional bodybuilding a couple of times? Hasn't been done recently, where it's called death cycles. I've only seen one cycle, and I think at Pete Graminsky, when it was 10,000 milligrams a week, and that only got into the Mr. America competition. When we've discussed top professional bodybuilders, Mr. Olympias, and multiples that have actually sat down and said, I never did this, I only did that, and so on and so forth. I've got no reason to lie. Very few of those exceeded 5,000 milligrams, and again, for very short periods of time. Even in the autopsy results that we referred to earlier on, I think we were looking at 4 or 5,000 milligram total of some of the steroids that have come across in the blood test after the person passed away. So there's a bunch of issues here that we could get into in terms, because we've actually done a show on this already, of course, and we've discussed these kind of death cycles. Dallas McCarver springs to mind, where you kind of almost get into the psychological aspect of, are these numbers necessary in, and I'll use Monstro as an example, for someone to be the way that they are, the physicality, the way that you look. And look, Monstro had an amazing physique when he was 15. He was, and I've actually argued backwards and forwards when he was alive. I've argued with him. But I also said, when you saw him at the shows and videos that he did himself, he was a professional bodybuilder. He might not have been an IFBB pro, but he was a WABA pro. And his approach to being a WABA pro meant that he had, I think, one show, Steve, a 20-foot banner at FIBO. He was going to Frankfurt, I believe, for FIBO when he passed away in his hotel room. He would march around his expos representing the brand that he was representing at that particular time. And the simple fact of the matter is, any brand that had him would know that they were going to get this little Portuguese guy from this little tiny island somewhere out in the Atlantic in amazing shape, who would work the show, would work the crowd, and so on and so forth. But again, it's that kind of risk versus reward thing here, Steve. When you're talking about 7,000 milligrams, 7 grams, I can't even, I'm trying to work out the multiples in my head. This is like 70 times what your body would naturally produce, when 20 or 30 times is going to give you great results. He wasn't making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. So it's kind of, if you are an IFBB pro, and even I'll use Steve here as an example, when we've talked about other sports, the risk versus reward kind of starts to come into play. When you and I have talked about top professional athletes in other sports, Steve, and we talk about baseball or ice hockey or American football or soccer or tennis or golf or whatever else, as an example, I think, isn't it at the top 500 golfers in the world, the lowest paid is somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million. The top end would be hundreds of millions of dollars. In terms of I think Steve knows some of the numbers for the lowest paid top 100, top 300 athletes in American football, and the lowest paid would be on multiple. I think is it $1 million plus, Steve, and so on and so forth. When you're into that risk reward, also again the length of their careers, and they should be working with good doctors, good physiotherapists. They can go away and afford to get surgery on certain injuries and so on and so forth. You're not looking at that here in Monstro's case. You're not looking at, for the listener listening to the show who's gone all gung ho and I don't give a fuck. Where's the reward, guys? I don't want some pissy ass little trophy, and I've got some pissy ass little trophies here, Steve, where I'm the money that I need to be spending to in order to be afford the 7,000 milligrams that I'm doing week on cycle. It just doesn't add up, guys. So you have to. It's fun to talk about. It's an interesting sort of conceptual thing, but it doesn't really work out in practical terms. I want to talk about briefly now, Steve, Beligas itself, purely and simply because we do these shows and we're ably supported by companies like Beligas that allows us to put out this information. So why do we like companies like Beligas? Let me use this as an example. And one of the things I've said before when it comes to Beligas is they are an actual legitimate pharmaceutical company based in Belgium. Most of the time when we're talking about sophisticated, what used to be called underground labs. They're not as underground as they used to be in the past, but the proper setups, proper machinery, proper chemists working, etc. But they're not an actual pharmaceutical company based in Belgium where inspectors, local council inspectors, regional inspectors, government inspectors, whatever, can walk into that plant at any time and check your processes, take products from the line and test them. They don't require licenses. Beligas does. So that's number one. Number two is, because we're talking about performance enhancement here, athletes using their products. So why would they use their products? Well, number one is what I've already said. They are an actual pharmaceutical company. And some people go crazy for what they call pharma versus anything else. Number two is how these products are presented. I've used the analogy before, Steve, when I say, I want my steroids, my anabolics, my ancillaries, my whatever to look like I could go to a pharmacy in America, chemist here in the UK, and see that product on the shelf behind a pharmacist for them to hand over to me with my script. I want to know from an athlete's point of view that these products are properly dosed, that they are tested, that they are tried, that they are trusted. I want to be able to know that if I take 300 milligrams of this or 200 milligrams of that, or if I want to use a D-bowl, I'm almost guaranteed, assuming all the other fit parameters are in place, my diet and my training are on point, I'm almost guaranteed to get results. Talk a little bit about Beligas, Steve, before we do the end part.
Well, the good thing about Belagas, no matter where you're at on this, the seven different categories, and 99% of you will never be past C, the third category we talked about, or the fourth category we talked about. So
Yeah,
Belagas is good for you. If you're a professional, Belagas is good for you.
yeah,
So it really doesn't matter where you're at. They cater to everybody. They have excellent products and a wide selection. Their products are legit. A lot of people trust them because their products are legit. When you want to use a steroid cycle, you want to make sure when you take something, you're taking what it says it is. You don't want to take something that's fake or underdose. So it's very, very important to make sure you're using a quality brand. And Belagas is definitely one of the top brands in the world that you can be using. They're as close as pharmacy grade as walking into the pharmacy and
yes,
grabbing a steroid off the shelf from an actual
yeah,
pharmacy as
yeah.
any brand out there.
I especially like their blends, Steve, where they put products together to be used exactly as users have asked for, and then they know that users are going to use in those blends. So you don't even have to stack these drugs yourself with individuals. They've got the problems, put the products together for you. So check out their blends as well. Please note, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It's our view based on our experience and views on the topic. A podcast for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.